In 1993, a Canadian lawyer named Gary Hoy claimed to a group of students that the windows in his building were unbreakable. To prove this, he threw himself at the window at full force. While the glass didn't break, the frame popped out and Gary fell 24 stories to his death. The man who once had the longest beard in the world died after he accidentally stepped on it and broke his neck. In 2010, an MI6 agent was found naked and dead inside of a padlocked bag in his London home. Police concluded that he accidentally locked himself in the bag and died as a result. In Houston, Texas, a 19-year-old man named Rashad died while attempting to play Russian roulette. Apparently, he didn't know how the game worked since he tried using a semi-automatic pistol instead of a revolver. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 2. Terry Kath, the original lead singer of the band Chicago, died after accidentally shooting himself in the head. In 1978, he picked up a 9mm pistol and said, "Don't worry about it, look, the clip's not even in it." He held the gun to his head and before pulling the trigger, his last words were, "What do you think I'm gonna do, blow my brains out?" There was a bullet in the chamber and he died instantly. In 1834, a 13-year-old boy died in San Francisco after a circus clown swung him around by the heels. In 2007, California woman Jennifer Strange entered a radio show contest called Hold Your Wee for a Wee, in which the person who drank the most water over a 4-hour span without urinating would win a Nintendo Wii. But after consuming nearly 2 gallons, Jennifer soon complained of headaches and dizziness before dying a few hours later from water poisoning. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 3. Aeschylus was an ancient Greek playwright who is known today as the father of the tragedy genre. After receiving a prophecy that said he would die from a falling object, he spent most of his time outdoors. But he was killed when an eagle dropped a tortoise on him, mistaking his bald head for a rock suitable for shattering the shell of a reptile. Famous philosopher Kurt Gödel had an obsessive fear of being poisoned and therefore only ate food that was cooked by his wife. So when his wife went to the hospital for an extended stay, Gödel stopped eating completely and promptly starved to death. The first person to ever jump off the Brooklyn Bridge was a professional high diver. He wanted to demonstrate that people don't die simply from falling through the air, and he was correct. He fell 135 feet through the air without a problem, but hitting the water killed him immediately. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 4. In 1880, the Queen of Thailand's boat capsized on the way to her palace. But despite many witnesses, nobody dared to save the drowning queen and her daughter. This was because touching the queen under any circumstances was a crime punishable by death. Bobby Leach was a world-renowned daredevil who became the second person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. A few years later, he died from a vicious infection after slipping on an orange peel. In 1996, a man named Michael Paul was on his way home from church when he decided to crack his neck just like any other time. But a few minutes afterwards, he suddenly started sweating profusely and then went pale. By the time Michael was brought to a hospital, he had already slipped into a coma and died after 12 days of being on life support. An autopsy later revealed that the neck crack must have damaged one of the main arteries to his brain and resulted in a fatal stroke. In 2013, Rain Periwinkle was shopping for clothes at the dollar store with her 3 daughters when an older man named Donald Smith approached them and offered to buy them all clothes at Walmart. Desperate for the favor, the family got into his van and shopped with him for the next 2 hours. At some point, Smith offered to buy them burgers at the in-store McDonald's, and Rain's 8-year-old daughter Cherish went with him. But after they didn't return for more than 30 minutes, Rain called police, who were immediately concerned. It turned out that Smith was known to police as a local sex offender with a long criminal history of assaults, and he'd just been released from prison 3 weeks prior. The next morning, Cherish's lifeless body was found in a nearby creek. It's believed that Smith bound her in the back of his van before assaulting and strangling her to death. During Smith's trial, the jurors were in tears after being shown the crime scene photos, and even the medical examiner had to request a break. The 56-year-old Florida man was eventually sentenced to death for the heinous murder. In 2006, 26-year-old Illinois teacher and wrestler Samson Shelton admitted to police that he raped a 17-year-old student before choking her and tossing her body into a wooded area. He then put a belt around her neck to make it look like she was strangled and left her for dead, after which Shelton went line dancing with friends. Suffering from brain damage and a broken neck, the teenager survived but had to relearn how to swallow, walk, and talk. But despite his heinous crimes, Shelton was released on parole just last year after serving out 17 of his 20-year prison sentence. In 2008, a train traveling 70 miles an hour struck and killed an 18-year-old man who was running across the tracks and apparently didn't realize how fast the train was moving. The impact flung the man's body over 100 feet, and his flying body parts knocked a 58-year-old woman to the ground, breaking her wrist, shoulder, and leg. The woman later sued the man's family on the basis that, if you did something as stupid as this guy did, you have to be responsible for what comes from it. In 2019, Cambridge University student Alana Cutlin tragically jumped from her airplane while returning home from Madagascar. She reportedly appeared normal while boarding the plane, but just 10 minutes after takeoff, she suddenly unbuckled herself before opening the door of the aircraft and jumping out without hesitation, falling nearly a mile to her death. Her family later stated that she'd experienced panic attacks in the past, and that she might have been suffering from a bad reaction to prescription medication. In 2012, 88-year-old Ilda Maciel died in the hospital after her nurses made a critical error while attempting to feed her. They accidentally injected chicken soup into her veins rather than into her feeding tube. In 2012, 23-year-old gaming addict Chen Rongyu died of a heart attack while playing League of Legends for 23 hours straight in a Taiwanese cafe. It took staff hours to realize he was dead since he fell back in his chair and his arms were still stretched out toward his mouse and keyboard. Children's entertainer and YouTuber Stephen John, aka Blippi, hasn't always been so family-friendly. He began his career as a gross-out video creator under the name Steezy Grossman, and would post shocking videos of himself performing grotesque acts across illicit websites. Most infamously, he performed the Harlem Shake in 2013 while standing unclothed on a toilet and defecated all over his unclothed friend. Despite Steven's regret and extensive efforts to have the video removed from the internet, it can still be found rather easily. Don't try to find it. Please don't. Oh my god, why did I watch it? What the fuck, Blippi? In 2013, unemployed 30-year-old Princeton graduate Thomas Gilbert Jr. shot and killed his hedge fund manager father just hours after being told his $1,000 weekly allowance would be cut down to just $300. He was sentenced to at least 30 years in prison. A Japanese pilot who bombed a town in Oregon during World War II returned 20 years later to present his family's 400-year-old sword as a symbol of regret. His daughter said that if he'd received a negative reaction, he would have used the sword to perform seppuku on himself instead. In 1987, North Korean spy Kim Hyun-hui blew up Korean Air Flight 858, killing all 115 passengers on board. After failing to take a cyanide pill afterwards, she told interrogators it was a direct order from Kim Jong-il that she had no way of backing out of without being killed. The woman was originally sentenced to death, but later pardoned by the South Korean president, who said she was merely a brainwashed victim of the real culprit, the North Korean government. Hyun-hui ended up marrying one of her interrogators, and they live happily ever after with their 2 children. While recording the audio version of his book Charlotte's Web, it took author E.B. White 17 takes to read the death scene of Charlotte. He's said to have walked outside for a breather, come back in, and started crying again every time he got to that moment. In 1184, the King of Germany was conducting a meeting with his noblemen on the 2nd floor of a church when the floor suddenly collapsed. The king, whose seat was on a separate section that didn't collapse, watched in horror as 60 of his noblemen drowned in the cesspit located below that hadn't been emptied out in years. In 1999, Martin Lawrence collapsed from heat stroke while jogging in heavy clothing to prepare for his role in Big Mama's House. He recovered in the hospital after entering a 3-day coma on a ventilator due to his body temperature reaching 107 degrees. This map published by FEMA shows the potential US targets in a nuclear war scenario. If you're from the Northeast like me, you might want to start building that bunker. Here's a photo of 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. being led to the room in which he was executed in 1944. He was given the electric chair after being convicted of murdering 2 white girls in South Carolina. The all-white jury determined he was guilty after only 10 minutes of deliberation, and he became the youngest person to be executed in U.S. history. Stinney was exonerated 70 years later after a court finally recognized that he'd received an unfair trial.